Dr. Harper, when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, weight gain and mental health struggles are two of the biggest frustrations that women are facing, but they're also two of the most misunderstood. There's so much bad advice out there. And today I want to cut through that noise and get right to the solutions. So let's start with mental health first. So
Yeah.
many women in perimenopause, they feel like they're losing their sense of self. They're having anxiety, depression, the mood swings, and the rage. Tell us what's actually happening hormonally that's making this such a vulnerable time.
I think that's a really good question because I think, hormones have almost been a bit misunderstood in the past or sort of been, sort of a joke, when women get to perimenopause and menopause. And what's going on is, I mean, I would say perimenopause is probably the most difficult stage of the whole sort of menopause process. And it is that stage leading up to when your periods finally end. And what's going on is that it's a roller coaster of hormones. And hormones are powerful chemical messengers. They regulate things like our sleep, our appetite, our mood, as well as our periods and reproductive cycle. So the key hormones at play are estrogen and progesterone. And what's going on is that the hormone estrogen is declining, but not in a nice linear fashion. So it's going sort of in this fluctuant roller coaster way. The hormone progesterone is declining is in a more linear way. And these hormones are very much responsible to a lot of our mental health and brain function. Progesterone is often called that calming hormone. It helps us to sleep a little bit better, get that NREM quality sleep so that we wake up feeling refreshed. It also helps with just helping us feel calmer because it works on those GABA receptors in the brain. So
Mm.
when progesterone starts to decline, our sleep goes off. And, you'll hear many women say things like, oh, I wake up between 3 and 5, and also waking up not feeling refreshed. The other things are women start to feel anxious,
Mhm.
anxiety, even those who've never experienced it before, feeling overwhelmed, and I mean, yes, there's a lot going on in life usually at this point, midlife.
Right.
It can be confusing, children, elderly parents, work, partners, lots of things are going on. But I think the first thing they'll start to notice is that change in their sleep pattern, flatness of mood, that loss of joy. You kind of said
Yeah.
about that loss of sense of who they are. And the hormone estrogen, it's a bit like, I would say, almost like an antidepressant in the brain. It works in a very similar way it's a neuromodulator. So, and what that means, it helps to keep our happy neurochemicals, sort of high, raised. So dopamine, noradrenaline, serotonin. Because of this fluctuant manner of decline, some days you might feel fine because your happy neurochemicals are nice and up there, and another time that you feel low. And that's what's the difference between that and depression. Depression or clinical depression is consistently low mood over 2 weeks. Loss of the
Mm.
things that loss of that, the feeling of the things that you enjoy, so anhedonia. Whereas perimenopausal mood changes or mood disorder is a much more fluctuant because of the
Mm.
fluctuating nature of our hormones. And so I think the reason why I said it can be quite confusing is even when you go to your healthcare professional, sometimes women are offered antidepressants, but
Mhm.
they're not depressed. What there is that flatness of mood, that loss of joy. It's hormonal. And many women know that because many women may have experienced depression before in the past and they'll say, this is not what it felt like before. This is different,
Yeah.
and yeah, so that's why I think it's good to clarify it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you described the estrogen at play. That's fascinating. You talk a lot about the link between gut health and mood and
Hmm.
how much of what we're feeling mentally is connected to what's happening in our bodies.
Yeah, I mean, often the gut is called the second brain, and we know that the gut microbiome um, loses some of its diversity because of the change in or the drop in estrogen. So we often call it the estrobolome in the gut. So estrogen and the gut microbiome are really quite closely linked, and also the gut is responsible for making most of our serotonin. So if I'm saying
Okay.
serotonin is our happy neurochemical, then another reason why when our estrogen levels start to decline is that there's less serotonin production, less diversity in the gut, and again affects our mental health and our mood. And also sort of indirectly there are effects that affect our mood, like when you don't sleep so well, you're going to feel
Mhm.
tired the next day, you're going to have this hazy foggy brain, and you're going to feel a bit more irritable. You're going to feel a bit more hungry or hangry. Sometimes it's not just a direct effect of our hormones dropping, it's that indirect effect of also the symptoms of perimenopause.
Mm.
Like I said, sleep is so important when it comes to mood, mental health, brain function, weight, so many factors. And similarly with the gut, it really, one of the things that also happens is our gut transit slows down. Women feel bloated. The
Hmm.
diversity of, the microbiome changes. And also it affects things like our immunity as well as, those happy neurochemicals, the production of those happy neurochemicals like serotonin.
Wow. Okay. Which I think what you're describing is what I think makes perimenopause so difficult. The symptoms all play off of each other and it's hard to pinpoint. So I think that really brings us into the lifestyle shifts because a lot of that is going to come into play into helping these symptoms regulate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways I describe perimenopause is like if you think about when you were younger, the path that we walked on was wider. So if, one day you had an hour's less sleep, you've got a little bit more leeway. If
Okay.
maybe you had a little bit too much to drink or you felt a bit more stress, you've got a little bit more leeway to play with. Your body is much more sort of reactive and responsive and kind of correct itself. When
Yeah.
we get into perimenopause, that path narrows to almost feeling like a tightrope, so that you can feel a bit like, oh, if you've had half an hour's or an hour's less sleep, it has a much more bigger impact the next
Yeah.
day. And that's why, lifestyle factors have a big part to play.
Mhm.
It's almost like we have to pay more attention to what we're doing, having a bit more of a routine when it comes to sleep, looking at things like cutting down on alcohol because our body's not processing it as well as it used to. So whereas when you were younger, maybe you might have the odd night where you're out with your friends and things are a little bit more free flowing, but now you're going to pay for it a bit more. Okay.
Right.
Also, if you are having a lot of coffee, and I'm not anti-coffee because I think, there are lots of good things about coffee, but if you have coffee too late, then that's going to affect your sleep. You may feel palpitations. Your body's a bit more sensitive. It's less adaptable in a way. And so we really have to pay much more attention to the things that maybe we've been told all the time when we were younger. What your doctor may have said: stop smoking, reduce alcohol, don't have as much sugar to eat, make sure you get sleep hygiene, and you follow a routine, going to bed, waking up, exercising, all of those things. And now your body isn't so adaptable.
Yeah.
It feels this narrower, tight rope that we're walking down. And so I think lifestyle factors have a much bigger significance now than maybe they might have done when you were younger.
Mm.
Does that
That's
make sense?
so
When
yeah,
I
that
describe path,
makes
path goes from being wide, maybe a 4-lane kind of, motorway, to this one lane that we're walking down, sort of driving down.
yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I can definitely feel that in my own life. So let's change gears here and let's talk about the weight gain.
Mm.
So many women, they hit perimenopause and then suddenly nothing is working. They're gaining weight and they haven't changed anything, right? They're still eating the same and they're still working out the same. So why does our metabolism seem to just turn on us?
There are lots of reasons. And I think firstly, it's the weight gain, I would say it's there's sort of metabolic changes that go on, but also our body composition changes.
Okay.
So, like our muscle to fat ratio, we become a bit more fatty, and particularly around the middle. And that's because estrogen hormone, again, affects our insulin metabolism, or the way that we process our carbohydrates, our food, and turns it efficiently into energy. And it doesn't seem to function as well, when our estrogen levels start to decline. So there's an element of insulin resistance.
Hmm.
And insulin is the easiest way to describe it, is a key to cells. So what happens is usually when we eat food, insulin comes along, the pancreas releases insulin. The insulin unlocks cells so that food can sort of come in, be turned efficiently into fuel and energy. And now that key's not fitting into the lock of cells. And so the pancreas is pumping out more and more insulin, and that's what's called insulin resistance. So insulin's not working as well. And so the circulating sort of food that we've eaten, which have broken down into sugars, then isn't being used as fuel in the cells. And then another hormone, glycogen, comes along, and thinks, oh, there's way too much sugar floating around in our in our bloodstream, and then converts it into fat. And that's why we then start to gain this weight. And you were thinking, hang on, we're still eating the same foods and we're still exercising, working out, but because of our hormonal changes and shifts, what's going on is that more of it is being converted into fat. There are other factors. Part of them is indirect factors, like when you don't sleep so well, your hunger hormone the next day, ghrelin, is high, and you're feeling full hormone, leptin, is low. And so you end up maybe craving carbs and sugars. And so you end up eating the wrong kinds of food. You feel tired. Perimenopause fatigue is a really common symptom. So maybe you aren't working out or exercising like you might be doing before. Maybe you're doing the wrong exercises. I think we're putting our bodies under more stress. Cortisol is our stress hormone. And when that's raised, again, that causes fat storage. So sometimes some of it is just lifestyle stress that maybe we haven't sort of taken into play and account because of all the things we juggle in midlife. Some of it maybe we're creating stress by doing the wrong types of exercises and really going for it, when actually maybe we need to change the shift a little bit. And, there is an element of aging, is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say, even though some of it is aging, but I think a lot of it is hormones, a lot of it is changes directly related to the hormones and some indirectly, I would say. So, and what tends to happen is that body composition changes. And another thing is, as our estrogen levels decline, and estrogen is produced in the ovaries mainly, then our body's trying to compensate for it. And one of the other places it can make estrogen, or weakly can make it, is from our fat cells. So that's another reason we become more fatty. And what you notice in midlife is that women lose their sort of gynoid shape, that feminine shape, and they become a bit more boxy and square. And then they tend to have this, the breasts tend to get more fatty and heavy. And then you get fat in places that you may not have considered it, like back fat, when people talk about back fat. And so there's a different distribution of it.
Mm.
And so, yeah, there's a lot going on. And I think partly it's also lack of sleep, feeling tired, lack of motivation, apathy. Again,
Yeah.
hormonal changes. Other hormone, testosterone, often referred to more as a male hormone, but actually as women, we also have a lot of testosterone. Most of it gets converted into estrogen. Hence, we don't, if we do a blood test, we don't have high levels of testosterone, but we do have some testosterone, and that naturally declines from our mid-20s into our 40s.
Wow.
And testosterone isn't just the libido hormone, which everybody thinks it is. It's also the motivational hormone. It's also the one that gives us that drive, that energy, and helps to build muscle and also, boost our metabolism. So there's lots of factors at play here. If your muscle mass goes down, and muscle is maybe the driver of our metabolism, then, it's almost like we're eating the same foods, but we're not burning them up in the same kind of way. Hence, it gets stored. Also, insulin's not working like it should do, so we're storing more fat. We're more stressed, cortisol levels are up, we end up holding on to fat. Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hear so much conflicting advice. You're like,
Yeah.
intermittent fasting is what you should be doing. No, this will wreck your hormones, And then some really push cardio. You've got to burn calories. You got to be in a calorie deficit. And then it's strength training and it's eating as much protein as you can possibly eat. What does the research actually support when it comes
Yeah.
to midlife weight management?
So I'm going to say that, it is about doing some cardio. Okay.
Uh-huh.
But like I said, not like doing a 45-minute HIIT class. I think you do need to work your heart a little bit,
Mhm.
because you need to, because the heart itself is a muscle as well. So we do need to work it. But the recommendations are something like 75 minutes of, sort of moderate to high exercise. But you don't have to do 45 minutes at a time or something. You can do 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, just to get your heart rate going up, a little bit of a sweat going, power walking. Muscle building and maintenance is really important. And
Mm.
that is important. And it's not just from a metabolism point of view, it's also stability, balance, moving into that next stage of life. And I think maybe many of us have been sort of fed that been told when we were younger, it was all about calories in and calories out, rather than thinking about what the content of those calories were.
Yeah.
And so maybe we've grown up not prioritizing protein because usually carbs taste a bit nicer, And I think that is key. That is important. So
Mm.
what you need carb wise is about 1 to 2 grams of protein wise, sorry, what you need is about 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. So if you're somebody who's, let's say, 75 kilos, then you need about 75 grams to maybe, 100 and what's it, 100 and maybe 12 or 15 grams of protein per day divided into three. I think it's quite hard personally,
Mhm.
so I think if you can even just get 1 gram per your body weight, so having 25 grams of protein, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I still think that can be really quite hard to do. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I think for women, particularly when they are watching their weight, and being very careful about what they're eating, then, using something like maybe a protein powder might
Yeah.
be something that helps. But it almost goes against the grain for many women in midlife to really be upping their protein, and contrary to some of the information that they were told when they were younger. Yeah. So, and with strength training, actually, you only need to do about sort of 2 sessions a week of sort of 20 to 30 minutes is what I would say. I mean, I tend to break mine down into like 10, 15-minute chunks. I find exercise, I do it more for mood, mental health, those kind of
Mhm.
things. I think we need to shift away from exercises there to lose weight. I think we
Mhm.
need to think about it more from that sort of mood, mental health, good for our heart. And I think, in real life, I think if I wasn't working as a doctor, I might have time to do all of these chunks. So I'd kind of split it up into 10, 15-minute chunks for myself
Yeah,
because I think it's
amazing.
doable, more doable. And I don't know if you saw one of my Instagram posts where I was doing my kitchen fitness. So trying
I
to
did
just
see
get a
it.
little bit in whilst I was in the kitchen making my coffee, waiting for something to cook. So I think it's about fitting things in around your lifestyle and what
Mm.
works for you.
That's a great advice. For the women out there who feel like they're doing everything right, but then they're still gaining weight, where should they start? What's the first thing you would have them look at?
I would have them look at maybe some of their supplements actually,
Oh,
because I think,
okay.
I would look at, and I'd maybe start with their sleep. Are you sleeping well? Okay, because if you don't sleep so well, you are going to be craving the next day and your blood sugars are going to be off. So, looking at things like supplements like magnesium, that's
Mhm.
really good. It helps to calm, helps you to sleep better, maybe a deeper sleep. Vitamin D, because vitamin D isn't just for your aches and pains in your bones, it actually helps to improve insulin sensitivity. So, I usually recommend about 2,000 international units per day for women to help mobilize fat. So I probably would say, let's look at what you're doing in your lifestyle, first of all. Are you getting that protein in that we talked about? Are you drinking plenty of water throughout the day, as well? Because that also helps with blood sugar
Mhm.
balance. Are you snacking? And this is because this is really important, because sometimes what we do is we may be thinking about that our blood sugars are nice and balanced because we're grazing, and we may be grazing and we think, oh, that hasn't affected our blood sugars. But insulin is this key hormone that we need to regulate. So by snacking, we're never letting our insulin levels go down. And so because of that, we're never losing weight. So snacking is not a good thing.
Mm.
So I think one of the things I do quite like intermittent fasting. I think it is a really good thing for menopausal and perimenopausal women because it helps you bring down your insulin levels. And when your insulin level is low, then that's going to turn your body into fat burning mode. But if intermittent fasting is stressing you out, then don't do it, because when you
Mm.
stress, cortisol goes up.
Mm.
So I'm very much about doing something that doesn't stress you. And when I talk about intermittent fasting, I often say, let's start easy and simple, and like have 12-hour window for eating and a 12-hour window for fasting, and most of that will be overnight. So if you finish your last meal at p.m., then you can start eating at 8 a.m. the next day. If you're trying to lose weight, then you try and widen that fasting window. So
Okay.
then you go to 14 hours of fasting and 10 hours of an eating window, but also not to snack in between. Because what you're trying to do is to get your body into that fat burning mode. So
Mm.
when we eat food, the way that our body makes energy is in two ways. It can burn up the carbs into sugars and give us fuel and energy that way, or it can burn up fat to give us fuel and energy that way.
Okay.
And the easiest way is to burn carbs and sugars. So that's why we need to try and shift our body into fat burning mode. And by doing that, that's why fasting does have a part to play. But as I always caveat that by saying, not if it's stressing you. So
Okay.
I would suggest a 12 hours on, 12 hours off eating, no snacking, looking at your looking at the supplements that you're taking, ensuring you've got adequate protein intake, making
Mhm.
sure you're drinking plenty of water and hydration through the day. And then we can also look at maybe hormonal balance. Is it that your testosterone level is low? Should we be thinking about medical hormone treatment for
Mhm.
you? So there are lots of factors here, I would say.
Yeah, that was so well said. You made it so clear and easy to understand and really helpful. Thank you. So let's kind of talk about that
Mm.
medical intervention some. Let's just start with HR.
Yeah, so HRT stands for hormone replacement therapy, or I think internationally we're trying to turn to calling it medical hormone treatment. And what we're doing in perimenopause, because it's not a replacement, I would say it's just topping up your hormones.
Okay.
So usually some of the symptoms of perimenopause, we've touched upon the mental health, the mood, the weight, the sleep, but also things like your irregular periods can be one of the first signs that you may notice. Your cycle may have
Mhm.
changed. You may be getting hot flashes, you may be getting night sweats. And so, by adding back some hormone, we can help manage those symptoms. And
Mm.
when I say adding back, we're talking about estrogen, progesterone, potentially testosterone. So it's very much sort of person dependent and individual, to each person, at what stage or at what time that the intervention occurs. Because it's more about this impact of those symptoms. So because each one of us is different lifestyle, and for some people, maybe the symptoms feel quite mild,
Mhm.
manageable. They have a different lifestyle. They can have a nap in the middle of the day if they're feeling tired. Whereas for others, maybe they're working, doing school runs, and
Right.
so staying on top of things. For them, they're not able to have that nap in the day. They're not able to rest or something like that. So I think it's very much about each woman and
Mhm.
about then intervening when it's right for her. But
Mm.
understanding that, I think the thing I'd really like to put across is you don't have to wait for your periods to stop to go on to HRT. Okay, you can start it in perimenopause. Okay,
Mhm.
and there are what we call body identical, the regulated bioidenticals available out there. And what that means is those hormones are chemically the same formulation of our own body's natural hormones. So we're replacing like for like, like
Mm.
natural micronized progesterone, estradiol, because our own ovaries aren't producing as much of it. And the dose can depend on each person. The dose can be variable. You and I could be on totally different doses, and it's very different for each person.
Is that process tricky to find the right dosage and where it's benefiting you, or is it pretty standard?
It can take about 3 to 6 months sometimes to find the right
Okay.
dose for each woman, and it's more led by your symptoms rather than
Mm.
the blood tests. The blood tests are good as a marker of a baseline, especially when we come to testosterone. They can also be helpful to see if you're absorbing your hormone treatment well. But I think the best sort of indicator is how well you're responding to it, how
Mm.
much your symptoms have improved. And sometimes it can take about 3 to 6 months to get the right formulation, the right regime for you. And we may have to try different preparations.
Okay, super helpful. So, you talk a lot about weight loss injections, specifically GLP-1s, which are kind of everywhere right now, but we've not had anyone come on to talk about that. So, I'm so excited to learn more about it. Who are they actually for? How do they work?
So GLP-1s, it stands for glucagon-like peptide hormone, which is a hormone we have in our gut. But we actually have GLP-1 receptors, sort of all over our body as well, a bit like our estrogen receptors. The way they work, and they are injections. Nowadays we have sort of Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, which are once weekly injections. In the past, we've had Saxenda, liraglutide, which were daily injections. And the way they work is that they give you that feeling of satiety, fullness. Okay, so they help you feel fuller quicker by sending signals to the brain. They reduce your appetite, and they help the release of insulin from the pancreas. They delay gastric emptying, so your food sits longer in your stomach, for longer, so you feel fuller for longer. And so what tends to happen is people eat less, smaller portion sizes, and plus, because of the effects on the pancreas and releasing insulin, food is metabolized better,
Okay.
more efficiently.
Yeah. So, Have these always been around, or is it like a new
So
discovery?
they started out off as drugs for type 2 diabetes because of the impact on insulin. And what we found is that they also help to reduce weight. So they have been around, I would say, for at least 10 years.
Okay.
And some of them maybe a little bit longer. So, like, for example, Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, it's probably been about 10 years. Mounjaro is relatively new in the last 2 to 3 years. But they started out initially for type 2 diabetes. And now, because we know that so much of a basis of weight gain around this time are metabolic disorders or metabolic changes causing insulin resistance, hence we're using them for weight loss.
Okay. Talk to me about microdosing. That's kind of a very popular word with these GLP-1s right now. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I'm going to say I think sometimes people are misusing microdosing just to
Okay.
make it sound it's okay, but just to make it say, oh, it's okay that I'm taking it. But I think for those people who are wanting to lose weight, I think you do have to give them the right doses, okay.
Okay.
But I think the nice thing about sort of something like microdosing or starting at a low dose, and something that I do in my clinic is I tend to start at a low dose and go slow, okay,
Mm,
because I think some people want to run before they walk because they just want to lose that weight. Okay.
yeah.
And then we get all the negative scare stories about it. Oh my goodness, I've lost all my muscle mass. I've lost hair. Suddenly they've got gallstones or they've been rushed into hospital with pancreatitis. So I think microdosing, we're talking about it more to try and slow people, or maybe to get people to understand things don't have to rush. And what microdosing is, and the reason I like it, is you can tailor the dose to each woman, or each person. You
Hmm.
can start off at a low dose, to minimize side effects. I think that's the beauty of it, to minimize side effects. So somebody will then stay on it for longer, get the benefits. Also, they can then stay on it for a longer period of time. It helps to reduce inflammation in the body. And we know that we're finding that it's helping with things like joint aches and pains. It helps with mood, maybe
Mm,
sort of cognition, as well as, you're getting the weight loss. The weight loss may be slower and take a little bit longer. But my view is it's better to do it that way because, you have your brain also has to adjust to the changes, because for me, one of the biggest worries is when people lose weight is that they will yo-yo and they will then gain the weight back.
yeah.
And when they gain the weight back, they're not going to gain muscle back, they're going to gain fat back. So effectively, if you say you lost weight on a GLP-1, as I said at the beginning, you're going to lose a little bit of muscle, you're going to lose some fat. And then if you do this in a real rushed way, and then you stop, and then suddenly, maybe you go back to eating the way you were and you gain all the weight back, you're going to gain more fat. And so your body composition is going to be worse than where you were before you started losing weight. So I think the nice thing about microdosing is you can put somebody on a low dose, minimize side effects, keep them on it for longer, and it's a much more gradual process of weight loss. And it also helps other systems, like inflammation in the joints and things, mood. But it allows time for your brain to catch up with your body, sort of adjusting to what your plate looks like, also to adjust to eating more protein, sort of adapting your diet, getting those lifestyle factors in play, going and moving more, exercising more,
Mhm.
building and keep maintaining muscle. So that's what microdosing is. And effectively, what you can do then is keep somebody on it longer and
Okay.
maybe even at a lower dose than what is prescribed for weight loss.
Okay. So I just have a couple questions about this that
Mm.
brought up. One, for women who are in perimenopause, is this just a personal decision? Like, I would like to try these. Do you need to be working with a doctor? I know a lot of people are buying these online now.
I know, I know. I think that's really worrying actually, because I think
Okay.
that's when these negative effects happen, and I
Okay.
think that's when, hair thinning might happen. That's when women may lose a lot more muscle than they should do.
Mm,
I think you should work with a doctor or with a
okay.
healthcare professional. I think it is part of the process in perimenopause. I think it is something that, you know, often in my clinic, we will look at the hormonal balance first
Mhm.
before we go down the route of adding a GLP-1 in, because if you think about what I said before, one of the reasons we gain weight is we're tired, we're not motivated, we're eating the wrong foods. If you correct the hormonal balance, that might just be enough to help with the
Mhm.
natural weight loss, or because she's sleeping better, she's got more energy, she's motivated. And so you may not need to go down the route of a GLP-1. Okay. But then there are also a lot of women who who do feel much better on their hormone treatment, and yet they're still struggling. And like you said,
Mm-hmm.
they're trying, they're not lazy, and that's one of the things I would say, they're not lazy.
Mm-hmm.
And they just need more support and another tool in the box, if you want to think about it like that. And I think it can be really beneficial for them. And because also one of the ways it helps to lift mood is, a lot of women, if their weight is not shifting, if
Mm.
they're feeling sluggish and tired and their weight is not shifting, that's going to affect their mood. And
Yeah.
often I've found that as weight comes down, mood goes up, whichever way that we do it.
Yeah.
And some of the ways may be through fasting. Somebody may not need to go down the route of a GLP-1. And that's why I think you need to work with your doctor rather than just rushing to get it online, start it, and then, I would hate that for you to then gain all that weight back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good advice. Super helpful. So, it's more of a change when you've tried other things. It's not, this is my first resort. I want to lose this weight right now. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it can be part of the almost like the care package, but it's not
Yeah.
going to replace lifestyle. It's not going to replace movement. But sometimes, for some women, maybe we need to start it a bit sooner because it gives them that hope and that it gets them
Yeah.
motivated to make those changes. So I'm not going to say it you have to have done X, Y, Z before you can go on
Okay.
it, because I think that that would be a bit unfair to some women, who are
Mm-hmm.
feeling quite negative. And sometimes you can do it in parallel. And not everybody wants to go on them, actually. I think that maybe we're seeing a lot in social media, but some people are quite fearful of them. And I think
Yeah.
some of those negative stories can make it quite fearful for them. But I do believe that they have, I'm a very strong advocate of them. I do think that they work
Mm.
really well for women in perimenopause. And I think the other thing to consider is what has been their weight history? Do they have an overweight history, as a teenager? Was it really hard for them to
Yeah.
shift weight after they had children? Is there a
Mm.
family history of obesity? Is there a family history of high blood pressure, heart disease? So all of those factors may, lower the threshold for me then considering to start somebody off on it. They don't have to be super overweight to go on it, but there may be other factors. I think, okay, we need to maybe think about starting a bit sooner because we want to reduce your long-term health risks by reducing that sort of waste around,
Mm.
that waist gain around the middle.
Yeah. Great. If women were only to do one thing today to start improving their mental and their metabolic health, what would it be?
It would to get moving, I would say.
Okay.
I would say move.
Hmm.
Okay. Go and do your steps. And I don't mean 10,000. I just mean like 5,000 or so. There was a study last year in the American Medical Association journal saying that 4,400 steps in older women reduces mortality. So I'm not somebody who sets the bar too high for women. Because I
I
know what
love
it's like
that.
to be. I know what it's like to be a real woman and juggle everything that you have to do. But I think movement is good for your
Mm.
mental health, it's good for your brain health, and also from the point of view of maintaining muscle. And if you go walking with friends, then it's also going to help to release some of those happy endorphins, and it's social. So I would say move. And can I say drink more water? Can I add two in there? Can I
Yeah.
add the second one? So that also helps with hydration, also helps with your blood sugar balance. And one of the things that as women in midlife, we are much more sensitive to fluctuations in our blood sugar levels. So drinking water will help to balance
Mm.
that out a bit more.
So helpful. I've learned so much from you today. This is just one of the most beneficial conversations I feel like we've had in a while. And it was so clear, and you were amazing. So tell everyone how they can find you or potentially work with you. I don't know if that's a possibility or
Yeah,
not.
look, do follow me on my socials. It's at Dr. Shahzadi Harper on Instagram and TikTok. My website is theharperclinic.com. I do online consultations as well as
Okay.
in person. So you can email if you want to have a consultation, or just email hello@theharperclinic.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here. I learned so much.
Thank you.